Alright, hello everybody. Today we're going to be going over the Disc Priest for patch 7.0. So we're going to be going over today everything in detail about the Disc Priest, different play styles, different talents, stat priorities, everything you need to know about Disc Priest, how to min-max your class and do the best you can. So the first thing I'm just going to say is that before anybody asks about any of my UI or anything, I do have a UI video. Go look at that if you want to know what add-ons I'm using for anything. And yeah. Alrighty, so first thing we're going to start off with is just talking about Disc Priest as a whole. So Disc Priest right now is probably the strongest healer. Now, that is going to be quite a bit of news to some people, but Disc Priest is doing phenomenally well. And that is because of how much throughput they're able to do in comparison to the other healers, how much mana they have to do that throughput, and like how sustained it is, how versatile they are for every encounter. So they can be a burst healing. They are the highest burst healer spec in the game. They have insane throughput healing for fights like dragons, and they have some decent spot healing when it comes to playing a more Shadow Mend oriented spec. So why is that news to people? Well, Disc is an exceptionally hard spec to play. Do not get that wrong. To play Disc Priest at a top level is insanely difficult. There is so much going on, and there is so much min-maxing you need to be doing, and there is so much preemptive stuff you need to be doing while casting spells on cooldown and making sure you use every single global. Now, this is why you see Disc Priests, very underrepresented, and why there is such a negative persona about the Disc Priest. And that purely just stems from the fact that it is very difficult to play. I am not perfect. I watch my videos. I commentate. I say what I do wrong. I'm aware of, that I'm far from perfect. So, there is definitely room for improvement in my gameplay, and there's definitely room for improvement in everyone's gameplay. But at a top level, Disc Priest is doing amazing. So, first thing I'm going to be going into is the different playstyles. So Disc has 3 different playstyles. 2 of them are very effective for what they need to be doing, and the third one is kind of just like, if this needs to be done, you can do it. So the most common playstyle you'll see most Disc Priests taking is just the pure throughput. Now, this playstyle, you do want to combine, you do want to know when to be doing burst healing and doing other things, but this playstyle primarily consists of just keeping 5 to 6 atonements up constantly, using smite as much as possible, and just making sure you're just doing constant damage and constant healing. So you have constant atonement on the tanks, constant atonement on people who would be taking damage, and then when a burst heal sort of phase comes out, you can be popping your power infusion or your light's wrath and doing some radiances and getting out some burst healing. The second sort of playstyle you can, now the first and the second playstyle are very similar, but there are some major differences in how you want to be playing these specs. So the second playstyle requires you to be running very have innovates, and requires you to have lots of mana regeneration through your trinkets. So the second playstyle is where you want to be using Power Word Radiance a lot. So you're pretty much casting Power Word Radiance as much as you're casting something like Penance. Now this playstyle is where you're stealing, Boomkins innovates, Restoration Druid innovates, you're casting Atonement on everybody in your raid, and you're doing a big Penance with a big Light's Wrath. You're just abusing the fact that you can have these no mana cost spells, or you can be using Power Infusion to reduce the mana cost and just be getting out as much atonements as you can and just doing a huge burst amount of healing. Now this is very good for certain encounters, say things like Ursok, things like Scenarios, where there is specific phases in the fight where just a ridiculous amount of damage goes out. Even Il'gynoth, there's a lot of damage that goes out in that fight too. So playing that style, you'll see Disc Priests doing crazy amounts of HPS when they need to. Now, they might not have the same overall throughput as, say, like a Resto Druid, but who cares about your overall throughput? The hard part in the fight is when the most damage is coming out, and that is when the Disc Priest is doing the most amount of healing. Now, along with that, you have the third style. And the third style uses a very Shadow Men kind of spot healing sort of role. Now, this role is kind of a trap. It's okay. You get average numbers. Your DPS is kind of on the low side for doing it. Your mana kind of struggles a bit, but you can play into that role where you can be spot healing. You can be kind of pseudo tank healing. So obviously the negative effect of Shadow Men is that they take 50% of the damage you heal for them unless they're taking that damage. So it's fine to be using on targets, say have things like on Nathendra who have Rot. You can be spot healing those targets, make sure they don't die. You're going to do a fine job at doing that. You're not going to do as good a job as, say, like a Holy Paladin, but you're going to be doing, a decent job at it, and then you're going to be having a little bit of throughput. Now, Shadow Mend, some players will use it a lot, some players won't use it at all. So this third style is, up to you. It's kind of I don't trust my other healers to do their jobs. So as like spot healers, you're not really trusting them to do, their spot healing role. So that's when, in lower sort of tiers of rating, that's when you want to be using Shadow Men sort of more, intermingling it in with your other spells. But in the pure top end of progression, try and stay away from this style. Try and not use Shadow Men. You got to trust in your other healers to be doing what they're best at. So spot healing or throughput healing, all of that. So I mean, Dis can play that playstyle if needed, but it isn't recommended for a lot of people. All right. So the next thing that's kind of also up in air, I mean, there is a lot of discussion about it, is the talents. The stats. So there is some talk about Mastery being your best stat. There is some talk about Haste being your best stat, and there is some talk about Crit being your best stat. Now, the truth is, they're all decent. Every stat for every playstyle is decent. What is the best stat for all playstyles? Haste. What is the best, healing stat? Mastery. What is the best damage stat? Haste. What is the best stat if you want the most mana out of your spells? Crit. Now, in general, Haste will be if you consider you as a Disc Priest as a hybrid. So you're in the raid to do damage, you're in the raid to do healing. You're in the raid to provide more than what a Resto Druid can do, and if they're going to be damaging in low periods of time, something like that. So if you consider yourself as a hybrid, Haste, Crit, Verse, Mastery, that is your stat priority. Haste is your best stat because it provides for every 330 haste, I believe, it provides 1% damage. It also reduces the cooldown on things like Powered Shield, so it lets you get out more atonements. And then Crit obviously follows in the stat weighting, versatility behind that, and then Mastery absolute last because it doesn't provide you any damage. Now, Mastery does scale better for your healing. It gives you 1% healing for every 250 Mastery you have. So it is a good stat for healing, but it doesn't give you any damage. So that whole damaging component of your spec is not affected by Mastery, whereas Haste, Crit, and Versatility do affect all those three. So if you consider yourself as a hybrid, try and have as little Mastery as possible. Now this playstyle works out best for the second playstyle the stat priority works out best for the second playstyle I described. Right? So that's the playstyle where you just want to be the first playstyle I described, where you just want to be applying atonement to about 5 to 6 people. You want to be doing as much damage as you can, and you're just trying to keep certain people alive, heal through certain mechanics, and that's kind of the playstyle I lean to. So that's Haste over Crit over Versatility over Mastery. So the second stat priorities you can be going is Mastery over Haste over Crit over Verse. Now this playstyle is where you want to consider yourself as a healer. So this is where you'll be getting the most healing through your spells, and you do not care about your damage at all. Now that is a fine way to play, and that mostly leans to the burst healing style, where you want to be using Radiance, you want to be getting as much Innovates as you can, you want to be Radiance as much as you can, and then doing huge burst healing in those certain parts. Now stats like Haste aren't as effective there because the only damage you're really concerned about is a Light's Wrath and a Penance, and having that extra haste might get you out maybe one atonement, maybe the difference in your stat weightings won't really make too much of a difference, but the Mastery will give you more healing for those burst phases. So then after Mastery you want Haste, then Crit, and then Versatility, and it just goes in that order because Haste scales better than Crit scales better than Versatility. So the third playstyle where you're using Shadow Mend a decent amount of the time, that is pretty much where Mastery is not worth anything at all. So Mastery doesn't affect Shadow Mend, doesn't affect your damage. So the third playstyle where you're trying to be like a spot healer, do not have any Mastery in your gear. It is a pretty much worthless stat at that point. So, but just to reiterate, there is the best overall stat to take in any situation is haste. Crit versatility are okay. There's nothing wrong with having a lot of crit. There's nothing wrong with having a lot of versatility. And then Mastery just leans towards what you consider yourself as. Do you consider your performance in the raid as how much damage and healing you're doing combined, or do you consider your performance in the raid purely as what you're healing? So I would recommend haste over crit over verse over Mastery. Don't be afraid of Mastery. It's not bad. It's still going to be as a healing increase. So at this point, I'm pretty much just equipping anything with a higher item level just because I consider myself as a healer. But I also want to be doing as much damage as possible. So if I have, say, a Mastery crit piece, I'm going to be preferring this haste crit piece. But I'm pretty much just going to be equipping anything with a higher item level. So, next, into Trinkets. So Trinkets are very flexible. There are a few Trinkets you can take, and there are a few Trinkets you can't take. So the Trinkets you can't take are proc damage Trinkets. So things like the shock baton, they were originally going to be the best things for the Disc Priest, but then they quote-unquote fixed the proc damage trinkets, and now they are absolutely useless. Do not use a proc damage trinket on a Disc Priest. So, what do you want to be using? Dark Moon Deck Promises is the best trinket you can get for a Disc Priest at this point for pretty much all the playstyles, and that is just because Disc is constantly casting. You never have downtime in your casts, so you're doing damage through healing. You have a low mana cost on pretty much all your spells except Radiance, so having a 10% reduction, basically what this Dark Moon deck gives you, is very big. So this will give you the most mana back of any trinket. And then for your second trinket, if it's a long fight where you need a lot of mana, you want to be using this Amalgamum 7th Spine. So this just gives you mana back every single time you cast Shadow Mend and Power Word Shield. So you pretty much want to be casting Power Word Shield on cooldown. So this should be giving you mana back every 6 seconds, and then every time you use Shadow Mend, you should be getting this amount of mana back to every 6 seconds. So now these two trinkets are the best ones you want to be taking for a heavy mana fight. Now, if you're playing the Powered Radiance style of healing, where you're not going to be using Powered Shield as much, and you're not going to be using Shadow Mend as much, and you don't care about your overall throughput as much, you want to be taking the Cocoon Trinket. So the Cocoon Trinket will give you a net higher mana back, although it does require you not to be casting for a certain period of time. Now, if you're playing the Burst style of healing, you're literally your job in the raid is to be, countering certain mechanics the boss does. So in scenarios when the dragons will be doing their pulsing AoE, yeah, that's when you want to be healing. Between times where there isn't the thorns up and the dragons aren't doing pulsing AoE, who cares about what your healing is? So it doesn't matter if you're going to be sitting there taking a cocoon or taking a drink. You just want to be, doing healing during the times when there's a lot of damage going up. So that's when that happens. When you're taking that side of role, you want to be taking the Cocoon Trinket, and you want to be taking the Dark Moon Deck Promises. And then for fights that don't have a very long timer or aren't very mana intensive, you want to be taking the Dark Moon Deck Promises pretty much every fight. I would say anything that's about anything less than 5 minutes, you can probably get away with no mana trinkets. But anything over 5 minutes, I'd be taking the Dark Moon Deck Promises and either a stat stick or a proc haste or crit or verse or whatever you have. So I right now have an 870 one with a proc. I just use this because it's a higher item level than what I have, but before I had this, I was just using an int haste stat stick. Now, as a healer, you don't want to really be having procs, because procs you can't control. So as a healer, you need to be doing healing when there's damage that comes out. You don't get a choice as to when you want to heal, unless you want people to die. So it's not, the procs aren't worth as much for a healer as they would be for a DPS, but they're not terrible. You'd prefer to have passives. So if you have a high int haste or int crit stat stick, they're pretty much the way to go. If you have an even higher proc, I would be using that. So right now I'm using this 870 proc crit. and the Darkwing deck promises for a lot of the fights. So if we just have a look at some of the fights here, we'll go over what I would be using for them. So Nethendra, I'd be using promises and the stat stick or proc. Renferal, I'd be using the same thing. Ursoc, I'd be using the same thing. Dragons, I would be swapping this proc for the 7th Spine, because in Dragons you're only healing between like 5 to 10 people throughout the entire fight. Then for Cenarius and Ursoc, I would suggest you want to be taking the Cocoon Trinket and the Darkwing deck promises, and then Xavius I haven't actually done yet, but you do get a lot of mana back on Xavius, so I would probably be running the Darkwing deck and the Crit Trinket. That's on Mythic. I haven't, obviously Xavius on Mythic isn't, you know, a very hard boss in comparison to Cenarius. I haven't done it, so I'm not going to say any more on that, but yeah, it's not too important what you're going to be taking there. Okay, so next thing we're going to be going over is the Artifacts weapon. So the Artifact weapon, as when you start, you want to be getting Confession. You want to be coming around to the right and getting Power of the Dark Side straight away. Once you get Power of the Dark Side, you want to be going up, getting the Edge of the Dark and Light, into Borrowed Time, into Sins of the Many. Once you get Sins of the Many, you want to be getting the Speed of Pious and the Share in the Light. After that, you want to be getting the increased Rapture duration, increased reduced cooldown on Paints Up, and then Barrier for the Devoted. And then after you've gotten that, you get the Fade reduction, and then the Shadow Mend node, you know, the Taming of the Shadows. So it's a pretty linear path through where you want to be going. There's not much more to say about that. The best trait you've been getting is the Penance damage. There aren't any in Emerald Nightmare, which kind of sucks, but there are 2, I believe, in the Nighthold. So, you know, be on the lookout for that. Apart from that, I would be looking into getting Borrowed Time, Powered Shield Absorption increase, or Shadow Word Pain damage increase. But, you know, with Relics as a healer, you're probably not going to be getting the first choice on your traits anyway. But yeah, just be on the lookout for these 3 there. So the Borrowed Time, the Edge of the Dark and the Light, and Confession. Okay, so next, talents. Okay, so the Penitent, useless. Never take the Penitent in a raid or Mythic 5-man. There is no situation where the Penitent is good to take unless you're doing like 3v3 arena. Apart from that, don't take the Penitent. Castation is pretty much the go-to for majority of fights. Solid passive, doesn't have an increased mana cost. It's just increased healing on your penance, and increased damage on your penance too. So there's not much to say about that, except for the fact that Schism does have its use. Schism is your highest damage output. So, you know, be taking Schism when the content gets easier, when you want to be doing more damage. Schism is fine for your healing. It just, you know, takes a lot of mana to use. It's 27k every 6 seconds it is. And then obviously does increase your overall, it will increase your overall throughput. It's just the mana cost on it is fairly high. I did try using Schism for a while in Mythic, trying to just get out some big burst windows, but I found the mana that was required to use Schism way too high, so I just stuck with Castigation. So for the level 30 talents, there's pretty much only one choice here. You're very silly if you take the other 2, and the only choice is Feather. On-demand speed boost is what you want. Masochism doesn't really work, and the Shadow Mend healing on yourself, you're not really going to be doing too much. You have a lot of passives as a Disc Priest. You have the Powered Shield gives you 15% of the shield, so you do find yourself having a lot of healing on yourself anyway. So there's no reason, much of a reason to use Masochism. And then Body and Soul is a terrible talent. Do not take Body and Soul. So Powered Shield is rotational. You are using Powered Shield on cooldown. What happens if you need to move, you know, to a location quickly? Oh shit, Powered Shield's on cooldown? What? Oh no, I can't do anything. Do not take Body and Soul. It's a trap. Take Feather. Feather is amazing. Okay, so level 45. So you have just utility spells here. Dominant Mind is a very good form of CC in Mythic Plus if you want to take that. Psychic Voice is a good interrupt in Mythic Plus if you want to take that. And Shining Force can be useful to knock people out of things like Sanguine in Mythic Plus. That's really the only time you want to be using, like a lot of these talents you're only really using in 5-man scenarios because they don't work on bosses. So, have what you will there. So level 60, there's only really one choice at the moment, and that's Mindbender. Mindbender is only one global, so one global does a lot of damage and gives you a lot of mana back. You can line this up with something like Power Infusion, and it'll give you a very high return on mana. This does scale with haste because the Mindbender's attacks scale with haste. So Mindbender is pretty much the go-to at the moment, but that is looking to change in 7.1. So Shield Discipline doesn't give you enough mana back as compared to Mindbender. It doesn't give you any damage, so don't take Shield Discipline. That's pretty much the only reason why you want to not be taking it, and mana isn't too big of an issue for Disc Priest at the moment. So Powered Solace is okay, just doesn't do enough damage in comparison to Smite and Mindbender. So the only reason you're not taking Solace is because Mindbender is just purely better. Now it comes 7.1, Solace is getting a mana buff, and Mindbender is getting a mana nerf. So Solace should be becoming the go-to in 7.1, but we'll have to get a confirmation on the patch notes once that comes out. So to the level 75s, so we have a decent choice here. Now at the moment there's only really two choices, and that's between Power Infusion and Twist of Fate. So Power Infusion is very good for that burst healing when you want to be putting out your extra haste, reduce mana cost, put out a lot of powered radiances, do a lot of burst healing. So you can use this in conjunction with things like, you can be weaving this with Innovates, you can be weaving it with other things, you can get out that burst when needed. That's what you want to be using Power Infusion for. If you're using it rotationally, you're not going to do too well with Power Infusion. Use Power Infusion, for big damage bursts that's coming out. That's when you want to be taking Power Infusion. Twist of Fate is a fantastic spell for progression. Now, the only problem with Twist of Fate is that it's not preemptive. So when you're doing a big burst healing thing, it's generally... on Ursoc, Twist of Fate is amazing because everyone gets down to 35% HP, but a lot of the time you don't want people at 35% HP, and a lot of the time they don't get to 35% HP. So Twist of Fate, you just have to look at your uptime on this spell and to see, whether you're actually getting a decent uptime of it. So obviously the uptime of Power Infusion is about, 1 in 6, so it's up, 10 seconds every minute on average. So, compare the two and just see what you get. Now, a good thing to note about Twist of Fate is that your damage and healing doesn't both scale, so they don't double dip. When you cast a Smite, you do 100k damage. You're not going to be doing 120k damage and then doing 144k healing, because you're not getting the double dip. You only get the increased damage, and that increased damage just does the same healing it would do normally. And then the healing applies to things like, Plea and whatever else. So Twist of Fate doesn't double dip, so it's not as good as it sounds. But it is still, it can be up on fights like Ursoc, it can be up 80% of the time, so it's amazing. And then we get to Contrition. So Contrition doesn't really have a place at the moment. That's just because Power Infusion and Twist of Fate are really strong. So Contrition in 7.1 is getting a buff to 3 seconds. It's a 50% increased. So now Contrition might be taken, it might not. There's nothing wrong with taking Contrition. It's just the other two spells are better. Now, times where Contrition would be really good would be fights like Dragons, where there is constant damage going out and you have a small group of people to heal. So when you have about 5 to 6 people, not 5 to 6, about 5 to 10 people to heal, Contrition will then shine. So Contrition will allow you to effectively put Atonement on more people. Because Powered Shield has a cooldown and Plea dynamically changes its mana cost, having longer atonements out lets you get more out, more atonements up at a time with your Powered Shield. So, when Contrition does get buffed, you might see it taken on lots of long control fights or lots of fights where you're split up like Dragons. That's when Contrition might be useful. But for right now, you want to be exchanging between Power Infusion and Twist of Fate. It's very optional. They're both good. You're not going to be, having a problem taking either or. Alright, so now into level 90. There's only one choice, and that's really Halo. So Halo in a raid, crazy amounts of damage, crazy amounts of healing for your entire raid. Be using Halo after big burst damages. So like, Ursoc, when it charges, Halo, you get the damage, does the atonement, all that good stuff. So Divine Star is, not really worth taking. It does the same thing as Halo, but in 3 times more globals, and it has a very high mana cost for what the spell does. So don't be taking Divine Star in a raid. Only be taking it maybe in a 5-man, but I've been doing a lot of Mythic Pluses, and I've never taken Divine Star before, and that's just because Halo is so good. So Clarity of Will doesn't have a place in raiding at this current point, and hopefully it won't. It is a very annoying spell to use. It's not part of the Disc Priest anymore. Absorptions are gone, but it might have a niche use at some point, but at the moment is not used in any fights. So what Clarity of Will is going to be used for, or what its niche is for healing a certain debuff, or padding someone's health so they can soak something. It's a very niche spell. You are losing a lot not taking Halo, so taking Clarity of Will has to have a specific use. But yes, Clarity of Will does have a very large mana cost, does do less HPS than Shadow Men, so don't be using Clarity of Will for throughput. But anyway, into level 100. So, Purge the Wicked is pretty much the go-to for raids. That is just because it does more damage than Shadow Word Pain. It spreads when you use Penance, has a lot of uses. Now, it's not fantastic if it doesn't cleave, but it is better than Shadow Word Pain. Now, Grace is kind of a weird talent. So a lot of people don't take Grace, and a lot of people do take Grace. So Grace can be very useful if you're going to be spot healing. So for things like Nathendra, where people are taking rot damage, and you might be the only healer in range, you know what? Having 30% increased healing on your Shadowmens might be really, really, really good there. So you can't really go wrong with taking Grace on some of the fights where you are going to be spot healing, but Grace is kind of counterintuitive to the disc playstyle. So you're going to be doing atonement healing, and you don't want to be reapplying atonements because they don't epidemic. So atonements, because they don't epidemic, which means they don't extend. If you're applying atonement early on somebody that already has atonement, you're just wasting some of that atonement. So that's kind of the idea between why you want to be taking Purge of the Wicked, because Grace is pretty counterintuitive, and you're not in the raid to be doing that spot healing style unless that is specifically something you want to be doing. So for most raid encounters, I would suggest going Purge of the Wicked, and then unless you're specifically going to be doing something where you will be using Shadow Mend a couple times on somebody. And then the third talent, Shadow Covenant. Useless garbage, do not use it, replaces Radiance, doesn't apply Atonement, doesn't do a lot of healing. There's literally no point in this talent even being a thing. It is so useless, never take it. Alright, so we're just going to be looking at the burst healing you can be doing on something like Ursoc. So on Ursoc there's going to be set periods of time where the raid's going to be taking damage, and set periods where they're not. So in here you can see everyone's getting kind of low. We're not freaking out at this point. We're just, we're radiancing once. We have 10 atonements out. We're just doing some rotational healing. I see the innovates coming up, so I'm making sure to call for it. Once I get the innovate, then I go into radiance. I get my mindbender out, radiance some more, and then we're going to be haloing into a penance, and you can see how quickly everyone's HP rises, and then a revival to top everybody off at the end. So essentially just between that revival and that innovate, we will manage to top the raid, and then the charge comes there. So that's the idea of the burst healing, is that you just want to be using it with a cooldown like innovate, with a cooldown like rapture, making sure you get out atonements, and then doing some burst healing. Alright, so here on Dragons we're just going to be looking at what the sustain healing looks like. So as you can see here, we have about 5 atonements out on people, and we're just going to be getting to a smite penance rotation, and then using Halo when it comes up. Just keeping atonement on everybody who's taking damage. So we're sustaining about 4 to 5 here, keeping our mana high, not using too much, and just spot healing pretty much anyone who gets low. So as the dragons change, there's no point in doing really too much. We don't want to be wasting our mana, because Shadowmen, what it will do is it will do damage back to them. You got a bit of drama going on with the dragons here. Okay, we got one coming across. So still we have 5 atonements out. Target the boss, spread our dot, and just do some healing. You know, we're not going too crazy on making sure everybody's top. We're just making sure we're applying atonement and doing effective healing. Same deal. You know, this is pretty much what this sustain healing looks like. You're not topping anybody really. You're just, you know, padding out the raid, just keeping your HPS high and just making sure, you know, everyone's staying on high HP. Obviously there's a lot more going on in this fight than just me healing, but you know, this is what people are going to be doing. This is the fight, so you know you're going to be wanting to do this sustain healing, so you may as well see it, you know, where it's not perfect, where it's you know, you kind of just do your best. So Halo, heal everybody with the Halo, smite. I'm just trying to do as much as we can. Yeah, so I mean it's pretty boring to watch, I reckon, but the sustain healing for this, that's literally what it is. It's just making sure that you have atonement out on the people who are taking damage, and dragons, everyone's going to be taking damage. So yeah, some pretty sloppy gameplay, but you know, we did get it in the end. So all right. The last thing we're going to be looking at is some mythic pluses. So this is plus 10 at 855 item level, and this is just before the big lightning dude in More Assaults. So as you can see before this, we're just getting prepped. We're just making sure everyone has a fresh atonement on them. Don't really care about our mana. Mindbender out for the damage, barrier down, and then just making sure we get as much healing out during this phase. So shadow mending to keep people topped. And then just doing as much damage as we can. So as you can see, we're still doing about 200k HPS. Sorry, DPS, not really doing much. You know, we can skip ahead to this big dude. This is one thing I did want to highlight. So as you can see here, tank isn't topped really at any point during this ogre. I know he's not going to one hit the DK, so there's no point in healing the DK above 50% HP. So we're just trying to keep out as much damage as possible. Trying to keep the DK high, but not too high, whereas active mitt won't be doing anything. So yeah, it's just keeping damage up where we can, just making sure we're pretty much just weaving shadow mends in between things, and then onto the champion pack. So these two champions, they do enrage. As I said, this is at 855 item level, so you know everyone's taking a lot of damage here. We don't have the highest damage either, so. So, you know, the priority here is because we know that these mobs, once they enrage, they're going to be doing a lot of damage to the tank. So as soon as the enrage comes and the vampiric touch is about to expire, paints up, 2 enrages, and then we just start spamming Shadow Mend. As soon as he gets high, that's when we're going for smiting. So, you know, you're not, as a healer, you got to appreciate what your tanks do, and how they're going to be tanking. So there's no point in topping a blood DK, you know, as I said before, because that is what the active mid is. We see the guy in rage, so we go back to Shadow Man spamming, and once he gets topped, we go back to DPSing. So it's just kind of weaving your Shadow Mends throughout your damage, making sure you are doing a fair amount of damage. So we did do 150k, that's essentially all single target there. So that's nothing too shabby. Yeah, so that's the key to Mythic Plus, is just weaving in between your damaging and healing. Alright, so quick cut to some of the logs. So for my playstyle that I'm doing, where I'm trying to be doing as much damage as possible while doing, you know, some sustained healing, you can see here the amount of damage I'm doing out on each fight. So, you know, between 126k to 143k. Ursoc did 142k. So the damage you can put out as this is very good. That's not, you know, some tanks can do more than that, some tanks can do less than that. So, you know, obviously the damage is just pretty much representative of how many smites, penances you're getting off, how many Purge of the Wickeds you're getting off, all that stuff. So, you know, the damage is there for Disc Priest, but the one, you know, you're primarily a healer, so, you know, we should be concerned with the healing. So now this is the comparison to all the rest of the healers. So you can see we're pretty middle of the pack. Dragons, we're in front. Obviously, now when you're looking at healing logs, your healing is actually representative of pretty much how badly your group did in the fight. So if you're having to heal a lot, that means a lot of people are taking damage, which isn't necessarily beneficial. So your healing logs aren't representative of how well you're doing most of the time. So, don't look at your healing percentages and think, oh my god, you know, I'm not doing very well because my, you know, I have 50% healing log. You know, that's maybe just because your group is killing the boss in 3 minutes and no one's taking a lot of damage, and you know you execute the fight perfectly. So healing logs again aren't very representative of, you know, how good you are as a healer. You know, it's also not very, like, it's also can be, you know, representative of how good the other healers you're playing with are. So, you know, if 3 healers in your group are very subpar and you're,
Hey,
you know,
wake
the
up.
best, then, you know, your healing is obviously going to look a lot better than the rest of the people. You know, and vice versa. If you're playing with, you know, 3 or 4 amazing healers, then your healing again is going to be, you know, less than what it could be or what its potential is. So, having a look at dragons, at my healing, so you can see it's very consistent all the way through. So, you know, points like this is when the dragons, you know, tend to change, but when the dragons aren't changing, you know, very consistent healing all the way through. So majority of it is atonement healing. So atonement, 62%. You want to be trying to get atonement to about 70%. But obviously in a fight like dragons, you know, there is only like 2 healers healing with you, so Shadow Mend is a thing. So we had 25 casts at Shadow Mend. Not ideal, but that, you know, it's not the end of the world. And then a lot of powered shield casts. So one thing, so in this fight I am running the 7th Spine Trinket and the Darkwing Deck Promises. So if we go to our Resources tab and we take a look at our mana, so you can see we got back about 351k from that trinket. Now, that is better than what you'd be getting back from the Cocoon Trinket. It is completely passive, so you're not having to take 10 seconds out of the fight. Let me just close this. So the mana back from the 7th Spine Trinket is very good. So do try and pick that up for a lot of the longer fights. So we had a very long Dragon's Kill, 9 minutes. So our last phase went for a very long time. And you can see here, my mana is a very, steadily decreasing. We have a lot of, ups and downs and all the rest of it. So there's no point here where I'm, using Radiance like a lot. There's not, I don't think I got any innovates in this either. So, very steady decrease in mana. 9-minute fight. This is probably the longest fight in Emerald Nightmare, apart from maybe Cenarius. But Cenarius, you are getting mana back at points and whatnot. So this is the where you want to be taking something, where you want to be using these 2 mana trinkets, and where you want to be doing the consistent healing and all the rest of it. So that is a very representative log of what you can be doing, how much throughput you can be doing out, for a fight where there's just consistent damage. And as you can see, I do play with some very good healers. So healing, we're up there. So this disc is doing very well. And then in the damage wise, you can see where obviously a few people died in this fight as well, but 134k. So I'm not doing this to compare myself to other people. I'm just trying to show the actual numbers and what disc is doing out. So now I'm gonna highlight this guy Sups. He's the one who's been doing a lot of this burst healing style, and as you can see, his healing is insane. So Cenarius both times doing over 500k HPS. It's incredible. I think is the top healing for Cenarius. And when we see his style here, it's very burst healing. So atonement, burst atonement, burst atonement, burst atonement, burst atonement, and then just some burst atonement at the end. So very, very, very good Disc Priest Sups. Has a very he does this burst healing style. So we can see here that he casts Radiance 52 times. 52 Radiances. So that's majority of his spell cast. He's casting that almost as much as Power Word Shield. He's casted Plea 13 times. So we can actually go to cast, and we just see, like, in comparison to what he's doing. So, 52 Radiance casts, 99's Penance casts. So a lot of Radiances. He gets, how many Innovates does he get in this? Damage buffs, Innovate. So he gets 2 Innovates during this fight. It's obviously from a Boomkin because he gets the Rapid Innovate. He's using Rapture 3 times. They are not lined up with his Innovate, so he's using Rapture in conjunction with Innovate at different points. And I believe they also, so a Symbol of Hope as well during the fight. So there's 3 points in this fight where there is no mana cost for his spells. So that in those points, if we have a look, these essentially all will be correlating up to with his burst healing. So we can see healing. We just highlight, this period here where he's doing this crazy amount of healing throughout. It's, why is it not showing me the spell casts? Where's the events? So Smite, where does it start? So Radiance, Penance, Purge of the Wicked, Shield, Radiance, Barrier, Radiance, Penance, Shield with Rapture, Penance. So you can see here there's almost no smites in this rotation. And then as soon as he finishes, he's casting his Solitude, which is the mana back. So, he's doing this is I believe this is the highest HPS for all the Cenarius attempts, and I do think it is 5 healed. So, that should be that should be alarm bells for people who are going Disc is bad. Well, Disc isn't bad. Disc is incredible. It's just very hard to play, so it's quite underrepresentative. So so this is 5 healed. And look how much he's ahead, and this is 31% overhealing at 541 k HPS. Compare that to any other healer. No healer has even close to that potential at this point. So Disc is amazing. It's very difficult to play, but it is very rewarding. So props to Sups, incredible player. But yeah, we can have I'm actually interested to see how much damage he was doing out in this fight as well. So, while doing 146k DPS, so, there is definitely a very high skill ceiling, and this highlights it. So, that's just a little showcase and some of the potential for this for some logs. So, we'll get back and look at some of the legendaries. Now, with the legendaries, last thing, so the legendaries are kind of interesting for Disc because a lot of them aren't very good and a lot of them are kind of niche. So every single one of them is decent. They're not too bad except for maybe this one here. Now this could be very good, could be very bad depending on the fight. If you're not using Plea, which a lot of people don't use Plea, you're always, if you're using Powered Shield and Radiance, you're generally above 5 atonements for a lot of the fight, so you don't want to be using Plea. So this is kind of counterintuitive to how Disc plays, because you don't want to be casting Plea at 10 stacks, because at 10 stacks Plea is going to be costing you maybe like 60k mana. So 60k mana to get 20% haste for 5 seconds might not help you. So this chest here is average at best. If it was off something like Powered Shield, it would be fantastic, but it's off Plea, so Plea is kind of a situational spell. The gloves, cool, you have a atonement on yourself all the time, can be very useful, can be kind of meh, not really legendary, I would say. The feet, I actually really like. I really want these feet. Procs of Powered Shield all the time. A free cast, making your next thing you can cast while moving. So it could be okay. It's not, it's one of the ones that everybody gets. It's all right. It's not the best, not the worst. This one I believe is the best one though. So this makes your penance heal everybody affected by your powered barrier. So if your whole raid is stacking underneath a powered barrier, hello 400k heal to 20 people. That is huge. That makes barrier pretty much the best cooldown in the game if you have this ring. Especially couple that with the fact that you're atonement healing, plus you're doing double healing by atonements with this third artifact trait. So barrier will be a crazy cooldown if you have this ring. I reckon this ring is the best healing legendary for the Disc Priest. So the next best one, I'm just going to skip the generic ones, these two, because they're fucking annoying. So the belt, very big DPS increase this belt. Now the one thing about it is that penance does have a fairly large mana cost attached to it. So if you are using penance more, you are going to be using more mana. So you can combat that with things like different trinkets. But that is the one downside to this. Obviously more mana cost, but your damage will skyrocket with this. So with a 30% proc chance, you're going to be getting a reset on the second thing about... what is it? It's about... You know, you have I think it's like 66. I was watching something the other day, and I think it's like you have like a 60% chance for it to reset on every second cast. So you know, you cast your penance is only a 9-second cooldown, and you're using, you know, your GCDs are at 1.22 seconds. Well, that's what mine is at least. So you know, your penance will be about halfway off cooldown by the time it's averagely gonna reset from this belt. So you do get about a 50% uptime increase on penance. So it is decent. For damage, it is amazing for damage, and it is really good for your throughput too. It's just it has that mana cost attached to it. I would love it if I got this belt though. Don't take me wrong. And then the wrists. I actually really like these wrists. I really want these wrists. So the powered shield reduction on pain suppression. If you're using your pain suppression properly, these wrists are crazy good. 4-second reduction on your your pain sub every 6 seconds, because you should be using a powered shield every 6 seconds. Pain suppression is the best tank cooldown in the game. You know, if you have tanks, you can call for it when, you know, they don't have cooldowns or something like that. That's crazy. So that's I would rank, you know, these three. I would say they're the best legendaries, but none of them are too bad. None of them are too great either. So you know, that's okay. So what else haven't I gone over? So for the enchants, obviously int to back, haste enchants on your rings, and then Mark of the Claw on your neck. The priestess healing one just overall is pretty bad, so that's why you don't want to be using that, just because it just doesn't have a lot of throughput. You can take the mastery one if you really want, but as I said at the start of the video, I don't prioritize mastery, so I would prefer the haste crit. And then the hidden satire doesn't proc atonement, and it does reduce damage for Disc Priest, so it's not that good. Alright, well, I hope this video helped out a lot of people. Let me know what you think. I would love any feedback. You know, tell me what I can improve. Tell me, you know, what you liked about it, what you didn't like. If you know, think something I said was wrong, let's have a discussion about it. I am really interested to hear, you know, see how people, you know, are approaching Disc Priest. Obviously, you know, I like my playstyle of trying to do as much damage and as much healing as possible. So that's why I prioritize haste crit. Obviously, you know, some people are going to have a different opinion. Some people are going to be, you know, I'm a 100% healer. I don't play disc to DPS. That's fine. Mastery, you can go for your life and do that. So obviously there's going to be a few different, you know, choices behind disc, and that's what makes disc really interesting at the moment. So what I'm saying is don't, you know, leave some stupid comment saying I'm wrong because, you know, mastery is the best and, you know, something like that, because I have stated that. So there is different choices, and yeah, so hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.